China's massive trade fair is expecting companies from 127 countries and regions to head to Shanghai, revealing its expanding appetite for imports. The China International Import Expo, or CIIE, will be held from November the 5th to 10th and feature close to 3,000 companies selling goods, cars, and technical equipment. Experts say global companies are targeting the Chinese market, and they came to the fair to decipher China's consumption trend. So for more on this, joined us on the line now is Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. So first, Andy, could you tell us more about the significance of this year's CIIE? What's the new things in terms of the expo itself since its inauguration in 2018?
Well, I think CIIE has become a very, very important symbol as well as a very important platform for China's continuing opening and integration with the rest of the world. And this year, I think in particular, in the face of the COVID pandemic, I think it shows China's determination to stay the course. And what's very important to point out, too, is I know we'll be talking more about the business and commercial aspects of CIIE, but President Xi noted last year at the last year's edition of CIIE that this has become an international public good, meaning that it's not only good for developed countries and global Fortune 500 companies, but it also is becoming a very important method for the global South to raise their living standards. And I think that's a big reason why the United Nations and a number of the United Nations organizations from UNDP to FAO are partners in CIIE. And not many people might realize that. But it's not just about commercial development, but also helping lift the world out of poverty by opening China's market to countries all around the world.
And Andy, you mentioned China's opening up. What do you think the opening up reform bring to China?
Well, I think from a purely economic theory perspective, we know that when you can offer greater choice and greater access that allows companies, individuals, and countries to specialize, and then we have what are called the gains from trade. So the more people we can include in China's market, the better it is for China's consumers as well as for producers as well. And one thing we need to bear in mind, too, is that competition can be very, very healthy, and this can raise the level of Chinese enterprises and accelerate the rate of innovation for Chinese companies as well. So I think it brings a lot of benefits if properly governed and properly managed.
And on the global economy, Andy, what is your analysis to explain why the production and delivery cannot keep up with demand? And how are supply-side disruptions affecting business and consumers?
Well, this is, I think, a very hot subject these days. I think one reason, of course, is that COVID, especially in its beginning stages, was an enormous shock to economies all around the world, including China. And this caused a number of disruptions with businesses shutting down, people not being able to go to work. And given the world of pre-COVID, where the guiding principle of supply chains and therefore businesses was just in time, meaning that companies really wanted to keep as little inventory on hand as possible and be as specialized and as integrated. And we saw that this is not without risk and without cost when something like COVID, an earthquake, something that disrupts these supply chains. So I think what the world has learned is that not to say globalization, integrated supply chains are bad, but we also need to build a certain amount of resiliency into these supply chains. And this is something the world is still dealing with. We're still dealing with this world of just in time and everything that implies, shipping backlogs, trucking shortages, even fuel shortages as well.
So is there a solution in sight?
Well, I think the good news is in the long run, economies countries, companies, and individuals adapt because they respond to economic forces. But the problem is in the short term, it will take some time. And I think as long as countries and companies can work together, these short-term costs and obstacles can be mitigated, but they cannot be completely avoided.
Mm-hmm. And currently, different countries have adopted different policies to respond to the pandemic, resulting in different timelines in how they reopen and restart their economies. So, Andy, how does this difference in reopening factor into global trade?
Well, I think the biggest difference is countries like China that have a people-oriented philosophy and way of governing, as well as very, very strong execution ability, have pursued one path. And other countries that maybe put capital first, have moved along another path. And I think this we can see it's not just in terms of economic costs, but there are very human costs as well. That being said, I think the entire world, every country, whether it's a developed economy to a developing economy, wants to mitigate these costs, whether they're human costs of death, sickness, economic costs, as well, behind them as quickly as possible. And whatever philosophy or strategy a country's pursuing, I think the important thing is that when countries can work together in a good faith way that is based on mutual respect, and that this is the fastest way to solve these problems.
And how do you think are the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic shaping the global trade landscape? And are you seeing any significant structural changes?
Well, I think what COVID-19 has revealed from a trade perspective is just how important China is. We've seen that with people stuck at home, that created a boom in everything from home furnishing, consumer electronics, exercise equipment, to PPE, and that China as the manufacturing hub, which is able to not only manufacture at scale, but to high quality and low prices, has proven indispensable. And I think that has only reinforced that from a trade perspective, and this has geopolitical implications as well, because I think this also helps to neutralize some of these, I would say, fantasies by some countries or politicians of some countries that say they want to decouple from China. And I think the reality is that given the centrality of China from a trade perspective, even from a governance perspective, when we look at China's role in supranational organizations like the United Nations, that really working together is the only way forward.
And this year actually marks the 20th anniversary of China joining the World Trade Organization, or WTO. So how have China and the global market benefited from China's membership into the WTO, and what role has China played in the WTO?
Well, I think the WTO is an enormously important milestone for China and played a very, very important role in helping lift 800 million people out of poverty and transforming the country. As we all know, the China of today is very, very different from the China of 20 years ago. So I think it's been very, very positive for China. I think globally, especially for developed economies like those of the United States and the EU, it's delivered higher living standards to hundreds of millions of people in these economies by providing high-quality, lower-cost goods that they otherwise would not be able to purchase. So we need to recognize that people's lives can be improved by increasing incomes or by providing better quality, higher quantity of goods for any given level of income. And this is what China has done for the world, and I think this is not as widely appreciated.